Hello, my name is Professor Angela Daly and I work here at the Chinese University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law. In this short video on internet law, I am going to talk about surveillance and the law. I will give an overview of what surveillance is, the Snowden revelations and their impact, and then surveillance law in Hong Kong. So firstly, what is surveillance? Well, according to well-known Canadian surveillance studies professor David Lyons, surveillance is the monitoring of behaviour, activities, or other changing information, usually of people, for the purposes of influencing, managing, directing, protecting them. Surveillance has been carried out by government agencies principally to gather intelligence, prevent and investigate crimes, and protect people and things. Since the War on Terror began, after the terrorist attacks in the US in 2001, surveillance powers have been expanded in many countries. This has brought to the fore debates about the appropriate role of surveillance in society and how values like the rule of law, civil liberties and human rights may be affected by government surveillance powers. Other important developments have occurred because of the internet and its growing use. Many big internet companies rely on the collection of data about users to improve their service, sell targeted advertising, and profile consumers. These companies principally collect data for their own economic commercial purposes. However, the vast amounts of data they collect and the rich picture it paints of people has been likened to government surveillance through ideas such as Christian Fuchs' economic surveillance and Shoshana Zuboff's surveillance capitalism. So, the next milestone for surveillance issues since 2001 was the Snowden revelations of 2013. Edward Snowden, a US government contractor, blew the whistle on shadowy mass surveillance and data gathering programs targeted at global internet communications being run by the United States National Security Agency. Partner agencies in the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand worked with the NSA on these programs, and together they are known as the Five Eyes Partnership. Snowden revealed that the Five Eyes had the power to intercept and collect data on internet communications and from private companies holding that data. Much of these activities were not transparent or known to the general public, and even lawmakers in Five Eyes countries, nor were judicial warrants routinely sought to authorize these activities. Also, it seemed that these surveillance and data gathering activities could be used against anyone and not just those suspected of a crime or terrorist activity. This situation has raised serious questions for the principles of rule of law, civil liberties and human rights in the Five Eyes countries. Significant public criticism and concern met the Snowden revelations, both from within the Five Eyes countries and in other countries worldwide. In the US, the Freedom Act was passed in 2015 to limit the NSA's bulk data collection of calling records and provide more procedural safeguards, but non-US citizens are in a weaker position with less protection from surveillance. In Europe, there have been a series of cases before the Court of Justice of the European Union and the European Court of Human Rights and domestic UK courts to attempt to enforce individuals' privacy rights against the Five Eyes surveillance apparatus. Important decisions from the CJEU, such as Digital Rights Ireland and the Schrems cases, strongly affirm the importance of the right to privacy and the limits it poses on government surveillance activities. But not all Five Eyes countries have taken steps to limit surveillance powers. Australia, which does not have a constitutional right to privacy, legalised further surveillance and data gathering capabilities when it passed laws to create a mandatory metadata retention scheme in 2015. In more recent times, we have seen the rise of China as a global economic, political and technological power. Much of the world's technology equipment is made in China, and increasingly, Chinese tech brands are gaining strength and presence internationally. Right now, in 2019, there is a growing controversy about one of these companies, Huawei. The Five Eyes countries are taking steps to limit Huawei's presence in their telecoms infrastructure, particularly in the implementation of 5G standards. This is because the Five Eyes governments are concerned about the nature of Huawei's relationship with the Chinese government. The Five Eyes governments fear that equipment provided by providers such as Huawei may include backdoors, which will facilitate Chinese government data gathering and surveillance. Chinese companies have denied that their equipment can be used for these purposes. So now turning to surveillance law in Hong Kong. The main piece of legislation governing surveillance in Hong Kong is the Interception of Communications and Surveillance Ordinance, known as the ICSO. The ordinance was enacted in 2006. The previous legislation from 1997 was challenged successfully by Leung Kwok Hung in 2006 for its incompatibility with basic law rights. The ICSO provides a framework to govern the interception of communications and the use of surveillance devices by law enforcement agencies to prevent or detect serious crime and protect public security. There is an independent authority called the Commissioner on the Interception of Communications and Surveillance, which oversees the compliance by law enforcement agencies with the ICSO. The Commissioner publishes a report every year documenting how law enforcement agencies have complied with these legal requirements. The ICSO provides a framework to govern the interception of postal and telecoms communications in Hong Kong. And interception is interpreted in the legislation to mean the inspection of some or all of the contents of the communication in the course of its transmission by a postal service or by a telecommunications system by a person other than the sender or intended recipient. Important details here can be found in the phrases the contents of the communication and in the course of transmission. Since the ICSO governs the interception of communications contents, this seems to mean that metadata about communications can be accessed by law enforcement without the need for a warrant. Also, it is not clear whether communications which have been delivered and are no longer in the course of transmission are within the ICSO's scope for interception governance. Furthermore, it seems that Hong Kong police can access public communications like social media posts without the need for authorization. The Hong Kong Transparency Project has been critical of the ICSO for failing to adequately govern and limit government access to user data in Hong Kong. Another current hot issue globally for surveillance is government access to encrypted communications. Since the Snowden revelations, many people started to use encrypted communications and messaging services in order to better secure their communications. Some big internet companies also offered more encryption and security with their products and services to respond to this consumer demand. But law enforcement and security services in various countries have complained that the use of encrypted communications is hampering their investigation and crime prevention activities. They have argued that they need more powers to access encrypted communications, but current laws do not give them enough powers to do so. Some authorities want technology providers to build backdoors into their products and services to allow law enforcement access. But backdoors will weaken the security of communications for everyone. So, in conclusion, the dark side of the internet and digitization developments can be seen as the huge amounts of data generated by all of us when we use the internet, and how that data about everyone, and not just criminals or terrorists, can be collected and used by governments and big corporations. It is not clear what the ongoing social impacts of these developments will be and what this will mean for our rights to privacy, civil liberties and the rule of law. We also see how surveillance is not always properly governed by existing laws, as is the case in Hong Kong. Like many other areas of internet law, it is likely that we will see further change in terms of new laws, new cases coming up, and also new technologies.